Hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation, disseminating the results from my dissertation. As you can see from the slide, my name is Rosie Hollett, and the dissertation's title is The Interpersonal Dynamics Between Counsellors and Non-Counsellors Across Gender and Sexual Identities, a Study of Intimacy Attitudes. This project was completed alongside my Masters in Theories in Counselling. My hypothesis was that higher levels of openness to experience, as measured by the Big Five personality test, will be associated with more accepting intimacy attitudes, as measured using the Intimacy Attitude Scale revised, amongst individuals who identify as LGBTQIA+. The LGBTQIA+ consists of individuals that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, ally, plus. This community was focused on as research typically focuses on heteronormativity, and a gap in research regarding whether there is a relationship between gender and sexual identity and personality types in this community was found. Whilst research does exist surrounding cisgender individuals, meaning those that identify as the gender they were assigned with at birth, those that don't identify that way aren't as focused on in research. And with the ever-increasing numbers in the LGBTQIA+ community, it's important to recognise if there is that relationship between gender and sexual identity in order to identify areas for improvement in healthcare, counselling and personal care, especially considering that for individuals seeking hormone replacement therapy or seeking to transition genders are typically either required or heavily recommended to seek counselling or therapy alongside the treatment to ensure that they are doing okay and to ensure that they are receiving the treatment that they need. So it's just to make sure that it's more person-centered and holistic. Research suggests that there are links between personality traits and gender and sexual identities. One study was conducted on this topic, and after analysing 2 studies found that there was a significant difference in personality traits and gender and sexual identity. It used the Big Five inventory, which is a measure that analyzes an individual's personality trait based on 5 dimensions. So a summary of the results are as follows. It found that extraversion was higher in homosexual women than straight women, with absolutely no difference in men. Agreeableness was lower in homosexual than heterosexual women, but was found that it was higher in homosexual men. Conscientiousness was lower in gay compared to heterosexual women, but was higher in gay men than heterosexual men. There were no differences between homosexual and heterosexual women in scores of neuroticism, but it was found that it was higher in homosexual than heterosexual men. There's also a need for further training on topics surrounding sex and sexuality in counselling. One study conducted had recommendations for areas for development in counsellors, which are as follows. The first recommendation, exploring personal attitudes and beliefs about sexuality. So exploring the counsellors' perceptions and their attitudes and beliefs about sexuality. Could there be areas for them to improve upon? Are there areas where they're lacking knowledge? This can really help them be able to be more accessible for the LGBTQIA+ community. The second recommendation is developing a sex-positive knowledge and comfort about sexuality. So again, this is for the counsellor to improve upon whatever knowledge they already have and just improve upon their non-judgmental skills and be more able to be more comfortable surrounding topics about sexuality. The third recommendation, integrating multiculturalism and social justice into sex-positive practice. This is incredibly important in ensuring that diversity is met and is properly researched and utilised within these settings. The fourth recommendation, proactively raising sex and sexuality as a topic. This is the starter point for counsellors to know when it's appropriate to raise sex and sexuality as a topic and when it's appropriate for the client to have this addressed, not for the counsellor to just want to know and be interested in personally. The fifth and final recommendation is knowing the limits of broaching sexuality in therapy. So again, This is the natural step on from the recommendation beforehand. Knowing when it's appropriate and knowing how far they can go, just to make sure that the client remains comfortable and just to make sure that the counsellor is following their counselling competencies and ensuring that the client feels safe, heard and understood within their sessions. Another study was conducted which provided 10 domains for training for counsellors, and they were as follows. Number 1, ethical and professional behaviour. This is pretty self-explanatory. The counsellor just needs to know how to act in a professional manner whilst also following the ethics and diversity. Number 2, history and systems. Unfortunately, within the LGBTQIA+ community, there is a very large history of discrimination, homophobia, transphobia, and a lot of misinformation being spread, which has just really fed into negative behaviours and attitudes towards the individuals within that community. So knowing those history and systems may help the counsellor improve upon their own knowledge and could also improve upon the skills they already have in counselling. Number 3, anatomy and physiology. Number 4, sexual identity. Number 5, sexual development. Number 6, intimacy and interpersonal relationships. Number 7, pleasure and sexual lifestyles. Number 8, sexual functioning. Number 9, health and medical factors. And number 10, sexual exploitation. Also, researchers found that LGBTQIA+ individuals are more susceptible to developing mental health illnesses and experiencing mental health symptoms due to the history that the community has faced regarding homophobia, transphobia and discrimination. For example, there are more recent events at the moment regarding transgender community. So at the moment, there is a large discussion surrounding whether it's appropriate for transgender athletes to compete alongside cisgender athletes. This is unearthed a lot of transphobic comments and a lot of information surrounding transgender individuals, and it's just really bringing about a negative viewpoint on the LGBTQIA+ community as a whole. So, with all of this in mind, should researchers want to see if it's possible for counsellors to strive to improve upon their skills by developing their knowledge on topics surrounding sex and sexuality and gender identities? Could this be a way to discover whether there is a link between personality types and sexual and gender identities? Let's find out. My study was a quantitative one, and 150 participants were analysed after data clearing. Participants were removed from the data if they didn't fully complete the questionnaires or were underage, and there were 2 participants that were removed from the study as they identified as non-binary. Therefore, there wasn't enough of a population of that gender identity to compare them alongside the other groups that were created for the study. The 150 participants were then placed into 4 groups, Group 1 being female counsellors, Group 2 being female non-counsellors, Group 3 being male counsellors, and Group 4 being male non-counsellors. The measures that I used in this study were as follows. One demographic questionnaire, which was created by the researchers and was used to identify the participants' gender, occupation, nationality, and age. The following 2 analytical questionnaires were used, the first being the Big 5 inventory, which the author gave permission to be used for this study alone. And the measure looks at identifying an individual's personality traits and identifies 5 domains, which are openness, agreeableness, neuroticism, conscientiousness, and extraversion. The second measure being the intimacy attitude scale revised, the author once again providing permission for the use of the measure in this study. This scale is a self-reported scale asking individuals to report on a Likert scale how much they agreed with 50 statements, and this then measured their intimacy attitudes. I used a mixed ANOVA test, and it was chosen as it helps discover whether there is an interaction between within subjects factor and the between subjects factor on the dependent variable. So my within subjects factors are the scales themselves, so the Big 5 inventory and the intimacy attitude scale revised. The between subjects factor being gender and counselor status, with the independent variable also being the gender and counsellor status, and the dependent variable being the scores of the scale. The results, what were they? What was found? So the results found that there was a significant relationship between openness and agreeableness scores in female non-counsellors, therefore supporting the idea that there is a relationship between personality types and gender. So what does this mean for my hypothesis? Was it supported? Was it unsupported? Technically it wasn't, as my hypothesis looked at sexual and gender identity, stating that there would be more agreeableness for that group. But it could also be argued that it was partially supported, as my hypothesis does mention gender identity. There were 2 participants that did state that they were non-binary, however, there wasn't enough of them to compare them alongside the rest of the groups, so they did have to be retracted from the study as a whole. So what do they mean? What do these results mean for this study? We'll see. So, the results mean this. The female non-counsellor population scored the highest on openness and agreeableness as measured by the Big Five inventory. However, as I briefly mentioned on the results section of this presentation, the groups weren't equal in size. As you can see in this bar chart, it does show the difference in group sizes. So, if we look at the female non-counsellors, there were 93 of them. In the male counsellor group, there were only 3. This is quite a difference, and whilst the 2 non-binary individuals were retracted from the study as a whole because of how small it was, these groups were different, and it would not make sense to compare female counsellors and female non-counsellors only against male non-counsellors. So as the males did have both non-counsellor and counsellors, they were added into this, and that's why the results were able to be shown using such a small or such a large difference in group size. As briefly mentioned, when analysing the data, I did have to focus on gender identity rather than the original idea of gender and sexual identity. Future or further research could focus on interviewing counsellors alongside them, completing the Big Five inventory and intimacy attitude scale revised. This could be a really good way to get a deeper insight into why counsellors have differing or more agreeable attitudes towards intimacy. Could this be because of their gender and sexual identity? Could this be because of their profession? Could it be because of the way that they were brought up? Could these socio-demographic factors have an influence on their perceptions and attitudes and opinions towards individuals with differing gender and sexual identity? It could also be a good idea to start finding participants from a more specific group. So, for example, finding participants that access or provide services in LGBTQIA+ specific charities or counselling services. It's likely a better idea to focus on counsellors first and then clients separately. Research could then look further into whether there is a relationship between those types of experiences and training. It's also better at the moment to probably focus more on 18-year-olds plus, as these topics can be quite distressing or difficult to discuss, especially in an interview, and especially if you're speaking to the researcher. So perhaps doing interviews where you're just recording them, you definitely won't be using any identifiable information in the research. But yes, if you would like to look into the LGBTQIA+ community, the children or anybody under the age of 18, the ethical approval will be a bit different to if you're going to focus on adults. Finally, I just want to thank you all for watching my presentation on my dissertation. I just want to thank everybody that's helped me and supported me through this process. It was a process indeed, and it was incredibly interesting to look at my results and to just research this topic. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment below or email me at rsh21rfl@bangor.ac.uk. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.